Us in. Here we go. Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is April 29, 2025. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank Saul, the brother of today's guest, for introducing me to Alan Saul. Where are you calling in from, Alan?
San Antonio, Tlayapacan, Mexico.
How cool is that? You know,
by Lake Chapala.
Well, it was a real honor to have you January 7th for part 1, and I thought we'd just jump right into it. In part 2 is there a difference between art and science? And if there is, what's the difference?
Well, there's lots of differences, but, you know, everything is kind of related. And so, you know, in art, you come up with questions and try to address them. And that's what you do in science. And so there's lots of similarities, just, you know, different platforms.
Well, if I go off on some of these quotes, maybe you will expound on them. This is Jean Cocteau. Art is science made clear.
Not always, you know, art is not very clear. So, you know, it's like Sun Ra always talked about science and things, but, you know, what he was talking about would not really make scientists see it as science. So it's all human endeavors, and, you know, we all do things the same way in lots of ways, but we're all different as well. And so, you know, artists are addressing different kinds of problems than scientists do typically. But, you know, scientists can be artists and artists can be scientists, and it's not a, you know, completely, what's the word? There's lots of intersection.
Yeah.
For being, they don't need to be separated.
That's really good, because the word jujitsu etymologically breaks down to softness and gentleness, and the second part is art and science. So, I mean, is that sort of what you're, because amazing, the word calmness came out in part 1, and I like that you know, are a calm kind of person. You're grounded, and that it's almost like a softness and gentleness that resonates. And then the second part is art and science. So is that what you're talking about, is a dialectic or a binary, or is it like what Zappa taught me, embracing contradiction?
Yeah. So, you know, we're kind of conditioned to separating things to, you know, supposedly make them clearer, but, you know, we overdo it and we separate things that have lots of intersection. So, yeah, and, you know, it's just we are different people, and so when you say I'm calm, it makes me think about the reasons that I'm calm, which is, you know, I have high parasympathetic tone, so that's like a highfalutin way of saying that, you know, I have reasons for being calm.
Yeah.
And,
well, yeah, go ahead.
You know, I have difficulty with language, and I think we probably discussed this last time, that, you know, now I understand that my language centers of the brain are deteriorating, and I've probably always been weak.
Yeah. But you said, I think you did well. That's what I love, is that you were articulate and concise throughout part 1. And even though you would say that, so I felt I was learning a lot and getting enlightened. But when you said we separate things, but we overdo it, is that the human condition, that humans always overdo stuff?
Well, nothing is always, but
yeah,
you know, we think that the way we think is the right way to think, right? We believe in ourselves and whatever our beliefs are.
Yeah.
And so that causes us to do all these things that are not really true. Delusions. We talked about delusions, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And we're all deluded, and we think that, we know the truth, but of course we don't.
Yeah. Because here's another one. McLuhan said, when we push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science.
Well, but artists do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Push paradigms is what artists tend to do.
Yeah.
Creative people, it's just the creation that, that's what some humans do, is to make things happen and make new things.
Yeah.
Which, I think is very beautiful. And, science has that beauty. Some artists think that scientists don't know about beauty. And that's far from the truth, of course, because, scientists see beauty in the things that they're working on.
That's an amazing thing you just said, because I like how you brought into the idea of storytelling into your science practice. But here's a sort of famous saying, and I'd love you to comment on it. Arthur Clarke: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Well, it's not indistinguishable, because you can actually show, how the technology works and things, and magic, you typically don't do that. And, magic is, is a practiced, art, where you're deluding people. You're making them believe something is true, and it isn't. So magic's a fascinating thing, and it's all about how our brains work, and how we're deluded. We're easily deluded by things. So science is one of my favorite books. Actually, it's actually like philosophy, logic, things. I'm sorry, no. This is a biography of John Wheeler. John Wheeler was a great physicist who is responsible for a lot of the way that physicists think now. And there's a biography of him called Magic Without Magic. And, so it's easy to think that science is doing magic, but it's also relatively easy to find out that it's not magic. It's just figuring things out.
Yes. But yeah, you mean asking questions or answering questions?
Asking questions.
Asking, yeah. But that's what I do. I ask questions. So here is a rewording on Arthur Clarke. Warren Ellis: any sufficiently advanced civilization is indistinguishable from its nature.
Well, I'm not sure what its nature might be, but you can think that its nature just refers to what it is. So that's what's it called? It's a statement that's just true by its nature. It's like X is X.
Yeah, well, this is Bruce Sterling's rewording. Any sufficiently technology is indistinguishable from its garbage.
Yeah, I'm not sure what its garbage might be, but one of the things when you tend to make new technology is that you make mistakes and you leave something out, and you don't think about. So, for instance, I'm living with this wonderful guy, retired lawyer, who has been blind from birth, and he was just telling us a story about how there are these high technology elevators in places where you just have a panel that you push the button for the floor you want to go to, and it speaks to you and tells you which elevator to take. And the elevator doesn't have any buttons in it; it just takes you there. So it sounds like a nice thing, that great technology, but of course, for a blind person, it's unusable.
Right. Wow. And so here's Chomsky. We learn more about ourselves from literature than from science.
Yeah, it's a reasonable thing to say. How do you measure it? I don't know. You can learn a lot from science, but most people don't, read science that much, and they read literature more. And you can certainly learn a lot about people from Shakespeare and those kind of things that give you this great insight into how people behave. But psychology can do that too.
Well, Alan, your overall career, since we talked a little about your literature influences and your science influences, have you learned more about yourself from literature than from science, or is it pretty much equal?
Yeah, I'm not very introspective, and I don't learn much about myself necessarily. I guess I do here and there, but I don't think that, I don't know. I don't think that I, learn about myself from these things. I kind of, regard the external, not the internal, when I do these things. I learned that I enjoy, literature, and I enjoy science, and I learned what I like and what I love. So, but it's just experience that teaches you, and whatever experience you have teaches you something, and it is, in the end, I guess, about yourself. But to me, it's more important to understand other people, which I don't do a very good job at. But you learn these things anyway. I might not internalize them well, but I learn them when I read. So.
Well, Alan, you said the word interior, and that was the next one. Marshall McLuhan wrote a book called Interior Landscape. In 1969, he said, "For James Joyce has solved numerous problems which science has not yet formulated as problems."
Right. So there's, lots of problems, and that's like we were talking about, artists solve problems that scientists typically don't work on. But, there is lots of overlap. So vision scientists are very fond of studying, visual art, describing what's happening in various ways. So it's not again, I don't believe in, the separation of these things just because they have different names.
Just because they have different names, really good. Because Tony Conrad said the same thing about art. He said artists break rules that haven't even been made yet.
Well, I mean, there's lots of rules out there that may not be explicit, but you're doing your craft based on lots of other things that have been done, and those are kind of the rules. And then you want to break them and do new things.
Yeah.
And so, science, the same way that there's lots of things that have gone before that you're working on based on the knowledge that you've gotten from other people, and then you try to make some new knowledge and ask new questions that nobody else has asked yet.
Boy, that's amazing. You're almost directly quoting McLuhan. He says, "I'm after finding new questions and new metaphors." Beautiful. So here's Albert Einstein, Alan. "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science."
Yeah. And, I guess to me, the most enjoyable thing is learning things. And, that's it, that there's something new that you didn't know before, and then you know it, and it's pretty magical. So
that's amazing, because that etymologically, the word science is the fact or state of knowing. And, here's one more Albert Einstein. I'd love to hear your reaction. "Religion without science is blind. Science without religion is lame."
Well, yeah, I think you can certainly do science without getting religious about it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. And religion, um, it does fine without science, I think. I don't know. It's a different way of doing things that humans can do. Everybody has different ways of thinking and doing things. So I'm not sure that I'd see that as something in my consciousness that.
Yeah. Well, here's the last one on science. I'm curious. This is an archaeologist historian from France, Paul Venet, Veyne.
Don't know.
Science finds no truths. It discovers unknown facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways.
Well, that varies. The end of that varies, but yeah, so the reason that we want to get knowledge is that lets us ask questions that we wouldn't have known what to ask without that knowledge. And so people think that that's like building a cathedral, that you just keep getting more knowledge and it's going to amount to something. And I agree with Beckett and Max Delbruck that that's not the way science works. It's not building cathedrals, just piling up stones. So you just get this knowledge, whatever that is. And it's interesting and fun, and it's just it's wonderful to learn things and to do experiments and to come up with explanations and interpretations. And interpretations of data do vary. I don't know how many ways, but and that's what scientists spend, at least biological scientists and some other scientists, we spend our time questioning other people's work and our work. We don't ideally take it as fact when somebody states something as scientific truth or whatever. We don't go for truth. We try to criticize what's going on and think very critically about things and try to see where it might be wrong. So we're not big on truth.
Really? What's the function of science?
It's not not necessarily a functional endeavor, but it used to give people jobs in the United States until recently. And people enjoy doing it, and people can use it to, enhance their life or not. It's a human endeavor basically, and it has all the complications that entails. That it's hard to say what science is. It's a lot of things, and so it's kind of trivializing it maybe, but to ask questions is doing science. So.
Yeah, in part one, you said there is no reality. So I looked up the word real in etymology, and it said physical existence versus imaginary. So now crossing over from science to music, what's the function of music?
Again, it's not a functional thing. It makes people happy. It's, again, a human endeavor that, lets people communicate with others and, gives people jobs, and, lets them express themselves, which is, a key thing that humans like to do. So, it's one of the great things that humans do, but we do lots of different things, right? So they're all, they don't have to be separated. People who do music do lots of other things. They might write, they might do art, they might, build things. So it's something that we do.
That's good, because I've surveyed this function of music for a while now, and John Cage said it soothes the soul and makes it susceptible for divine interventions.
Yeah, if you believe in divine interventions, it really happen. But I keep saying it's a human endeavor and all, but other animals do these things too. So it's just something that the brain does, and it has adaptive value, presumably.
Well, then Mickey Hart, the Grateful Dead drummer, said it was warning. You know, you hit the log because they're telling you that someone's coming to steal your food.
Right.
And
So that's one function of, you know, these things is to
yeah,
give you, you know, let you survive better.
yeah, survive better. That's good. And then how about dance? My friend Dylan Buston says the function of music is to dance.
Well, it's one of the functions, but
Yeah.
obviously people can't dance to this, right?
Norman Zamchek, great boogie woogie pianist, songwriter, said, to keep us from going insane.
Okay. But even if we're insane, we enjoy music, right?
Yeah, well, that's the McLuhan line. You can't prove you're sane unless you have discharge papers from a mental hospital. But there's so many: ceremony, ritual, learning. You basically said it. Community. But here's what I'm curious your thought. And as we get into music, two of my film heroes, George Manupelli, started the Ann Arbor Film Festival over 6 decades ago. He said, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas said, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me.
Yeah,
say it again?
That's a popular idea.
Yeah. Is art making, music making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
Well, you know, my perspective is that to do these things, we need a brain that is actually, you know, doing the doing. It's our brains that do everything for us. And so to understand why we do it and how we do it, I think you have to go study the brain and see why the brain works these ways.
Yeah.
So we imagine that it's just coming through us because we don't feel like we're exercising ourselves to do it, right? Somehow we miss that, and that's just one of these many delusions that we have, right? So our brains have been trained to make music, say, if somebody's highly practiced like Cecil or all these other great musicians. And so it's in their brain already, and it comes out. You know, it's just like when I'm talking, I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. It just comes out. And I'm trying to speak Spanish, and it doesn't work that way, right? It just doesn't come out. And so I have to think about it. It's very different, you know, feeling. It's very frustrating not to be able to speak. So,
yeah. But that's interesting. Can art making, music making be egoless?
Well, what egoless means is presumably that there's no connection to yourself. And I think if you're doing it, then there's an obvious connection. So I don't think so. But you can try to suppress your ego in the sense of, you know, thinking that you're great or something. And that's certainly possible.
Yeah, because you brought up, you know, I sometimes ask this question of the 5 W questions, the words starting with W, why, when, what, who, and where, what plays, you know, the most important role in yours? I mean, it's a stupid question because it's how do you integrate them all? But I'll set it up with Paul Bley, the great jazz pianist. I spent many years learning how to play as slow as possible, and then many years learning how to play as fast as possible. At the present, I'm trying to spend as many years learning how to play as bad as possible. My solo piano playing is a question in itself. The question is why, and after why comes what, and after what comes when. So he doesn't go into where. Any thoughts on the 5 W questions and what Paul said?
Yeah, well, like you said, it's kind of a stupid question, but you know, I have a very big fondness for when, And, people tend to neglect when too much. And, when you're playing music, it's kind of all about when you're doing things, but it's
That
other things too. It's not only
that
that.
is amazing. My friend is the greatest guitar tech in the world. Thomas Nordig. He's worked for Zappa and Yngwie and Steve Vai and all these guys. He's just an amazing human being. He started his career in Austria and in America with Shaka Khan, and he when I asked him that, he says when. That's it. It's all about when. But do you want to guess what people answer the most important W question is?
No,
Most people say why.
oh, why?
Yeah.
Well, in my experience, people don't ask themselves that question. They just do things and
Yeah.
really pondering the why.
Yeah.
But, people who, who take the time to do that, can do it. But most of the things, we don't have time to think about why.
I interrupted you. What were you going to guess that most people say the most important W question is?
Yes. What? But I don't know.
What? Yeah. Amazing.
That's what people tend to think of most easily.
Aaron Copeland says the 4 elements of music are harmony, rhythm, melody, and tone color. In layman's terms and in normal person's term, what is tone color?
Timbre, it's the sound of whatever is making the music. Sound has all these qualities, and one of them is, how the different, so there's lots of frequencies and sounds, and so noise has a big slew of frequencies, whereas electronic thing might just be a single frequency, or very close to a single frequency, and so that determines how, the texture of the sound and the timbre. So, but Copeland left out time in that, although all of those things involve time. Harmony involves time because it's the changes, going from one chord to another and that kind of thing. So everything involves time, and that's why one reason it's so important.
Okay, then let's just no, let's wait. We're going to go into time, but let's wait on that for a second because
we have time.
How do you integrate, balance, deal with those 4 elements as a player of music, but more so you're a writer about music? Is there any ritual, any thoughts on those 4? I know there's more than what Copeland set up, but is there any that you're more gravitating towards that you, of those 4, melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color?
I'm not a very good musician. I'm really a lousy musician, and so I mostly hear melody, but it's all important. So rhythm is a key thing. I think the tone quality is very important to me. But it's all put together, it's integrated, and when you listen to music, you hear all these different things going on, and mostly we don't, at least I think most of us don't analyze things. I guess really serious musicians hear the music and know what's going on, and so they've analyzed it kind of automatically because they're so familiar with these things. But most of us just listen to it and think, oh, that's cool how that modulated there, or really rhythm, or how the arrangement is interesting, that have these different instruments doing different things. And so it's that it's really hard to give any simple answer to that kind of thing.
I've never refined that question that well, because some people are like, well, I'm a melody person, no, I'm a rhythm person, but here's the kind of related is my friend said the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. You learn how to play it. That's technique. Theory is structure. How does one acquire taste? Like, why did you gravitate more towards Eric Dolphy than somebody else?
Yeah, and I don't really know, but when I was young, I went to a lot of symphony concerts, and I thought about what I would like to hear, what kind of music I'd like to hear. And, it was more rhythmic than most of the symphony. Most of the pieces of the symphony would play, and interesting rhythms, and, I don't know, just more, less static, more dynamic kind of things going on. And so when I heard Dolphy, I thought, wow, that really, I could relate to that. It's really what I wanted to hear. So I remember having that feeling about Dolphy. But, who knows why we generate taste to taste. So our tastes really depend on context an awful lot. And, if we were just feeling good when we heard something, then we probably like it more. So there's all kinds of things that affect how our brains, decide what we like and what we don't like. It's a very interesting thing.
It's very interesting because most people go, well, how do you acquire taste? They go, exposure, experience. And I'm like, yeah, but, Stravinsky said it. Most people don't know what they like. They like what they know. So if all you do is feed people the Beatles, they're going to go, what's your favorite music? They'll go, the Beatles. Well, because they haven't heard Eric Dolphy.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we probably discussed this familiarity thing.
Yeah.
Most people, their brains like to have, things that change very much, have the familiarity, and other people like things to change and have new things. So novelty.
Novelty is a key word in part 1. I love that. Okay, so this is McLuhan, Alan. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's overgeneralizing things. That there's all kinds of music and different kinds of speech, and they can certainly be related. And Dolphy is a famous example of somebody who used speech in his music, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
You're saying something in music, but it's a different way, completely different way of saying things than speech. So there's similarities and there's differences, and they're just broad concepts that, and so, I may lose language, but I may, at the same time, preserve music. So I may appreciate music. And I think, a lot of people experience that when people are dying, that they appreciate music, but they might not be able to talk. My mother-in-law, had a brain tumor and died over many months. And, she, at the end, couldn't speak. But she still enjoyed when we play great folk musician, scientist, mathematician from Boston, from Harvard. Can't think. Anyway.
Right. But she related to, dementia and Alzheimer's patients can really still retain music memories. Well, what's more fundamental, language or music?
Fundamental in what way? I guess no, they're equally fundamental. I think. I guess most humans probably use language more than they use music, but some people it's not the case. So it varies. So they're both fundamental ways that the brain works. To some extent, it seems that there are non-human animals who use music and speech as well. And so it's just one of the ways that people communicate, and, animals communicate.
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Makes me laugh. um, Lots of things. Yesterday, there's Sibelius playing, and one movement had a lot of woodwinds, and so the flutes and the clarinets and the oboes, and I think I laughed about what he was doing there. Not that I understood it, but something made me laugh. So lots of things make you laugh.
Very good. Let's go into time. You brought it up, Alan. Why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music?
Good question. I'm not an expert on this. Somebody could answer that probably really well. It's just probably easy to adapt to, various kinds of music, and it's maybe conditioned that it just came around and people started doing it, and so then they keep doing it because that's what they're used to.
Boy, you touched on that good, because besides being intuitive and easy, it might be because it's in sync with walking and marching. Wayne Pete taught me last couple weeks ago that we have 2 hands and 2 feet. So that's 4/4 time. But some people say it's because it's in sync with our heartbeat. What?
Those beats can be, all kinds of time signatures. Heartbeat tends to be pretty steady. Our walking, doing things like that are pretty steady. So why 4? I think in lots of cultures probably it started with 2, maybe 1, and then it got more interesting and it got to be 4. And finally, people do lots of different time signatures in their music, and there's lots of other things going on. But the 4 has been the common time that people just sit down on.
Well, here's Captain Beefheart. He wanted to vary from what he called the mama heartbeat. He said that same old 4/4 rhythm is related to fascism. It's so fixative, so hypnotic, so synthesized, it's dangerous to the heart. It's faster than the heart, so disco is dangerous. He wanted non-hypnotic music to break us out of the catatonic state.
Yeah, but he was just trying to rebel against normality or whatever, and he wrote lots of different time signatures, but he didn't really have any deep understanding of what was going on with them. So his musicians just learned to play in various time signatures and come together every so many beats.
But would you say, some people say our heart beats in 3/4 time or 6/8, but you think
it can beat in whatever time signature you want, it can be
right,
million over whatever. So it's just usually a steady beat, although there are several parts of the heartbeat you separate out usually, and so they have different relations to each other inside the beat.
Here's Frank Zappa in the LA Free Press in 1969. They asked him about mentioning Pauline Oliveras' work with sound above the audible and below, creating a mass. And Frank says, not that it created a mass, it created something audible. It produced a some indifference tone, which happened to be located within the audible frequency range. By combining something so high you couldn't hear it and something so low you couldn't hear it, it yields something in the middle that you could hear. Whether you liked what you heard in the middle is another question. The concept is brilliant. Any thoughts on that some indifference tone within the audible frequency range.
Yeah, I agree. That's right. You know, we don't have pure tones usually. We have many frequencies going on, and anytime you have two frequencies going on, there's some and difference as well. Like you said, it's like Tuvan throat singing, where you have a very, very deep fundamental tone, but that produces all these overtones, is what you hear, and people control the overtones. So it's a pretty fascinating thing. Trying to think. Gee, I have something, in my book about this, and I just can't think what it is right now. But so yeah. So pitch. People think that pitch is a physical thing corresponding to sound frequency, but it's not. Pitch can be made by that kind of process of combining different frequencies and getting another frequency. So, and we can hear something as a certain pitch when we just take out the missing fundamental. So, yeah, we again are deluded about music being based on certain physical properties.
Well, that's great. Monk said, music is math. He said, there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Yeah, well, much has been written about that kind of thing. And, Booker Little talked about how if there's a wrong note, you then play something that makes it a right note. So.
Yeah, because this is the other thing Monk said that had a big impact on me is silence is the loudest sound in the universe. How have you recognized, the importance of silence and not playing in the midst of music that's really, it seems as though somebody like Eric Dolphy or Beefheart, there's not a lot of silence. And maybe, I mean, there is, but you know what I'm saying? How does the musician know how to not play and integrate silence?
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think about speech, really, that there are lots of people who can go on and on, like without stopping talking. They can talk. And I've really remarked on that lately that, they don't take a break to have some silence where I could, say something. So it's very weird to me. And so in music, same kind of thing. People want to say things, and so they keep talking. And so, yeah, some of these musicians, like Dolphy and Train, they like to play very long solos and say all kinds of things because they have a lot to say.
Yeah.
It's not everybody's cup of tea, and other people take lots of silences as they're playing. And yeah, it's different ways of expressing yourself. I guess
different ways. Because George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, said funk is the absence of. And so here's Wee, the artist. He said silence is music.
Well, yeah, Cage is famous for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So silence is great. And, I don't like to talk. And so I kind of like silence and quiet. So Mexico is very noisy,
Uh-huh.
Always stuff going on and people making noise, music and fireworks and all kinds of things make noise. And so it's interesting. Not a lot of silence, but it does exist. You go up the mountains and it gets quiet.
Alan, here's the last one on silence. Thomas Carlyle. Speech is of time. Silence is of eternity.
Not really. Silence is, key thing in time. So, people neglect time when they think about how neurons behave, neural cells that have activity, and they just pay attention to the activity, but that activity doesn't mean anything unless the neuron stops firing, stops having the activity. So you have to have those breaks and things to have time. So it can't be eternity, which eternity hasn't, time doesn't exist if it goes on forever. So things have to change to have time.
Yeah. fact, Zappa and James Joyce said all times are happening now, all at onceness.
Yeah, I never found that very compelling. Parmenides' favorite, and Parmenides said that things don't change; it's all one. He's a monist. So there's a point in that, which is that we, I think, need to think about certain things that way, as when things don't change. So it doesn't have to be forever, but it's important to realize that lots of times things do not change, but time is really things changing.
Well, especially in regards to your two main people you've written about, Eric Dolphy and Captain Beefheart, this is Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role did risk playing, in their creative process?
Yeah, well, risk is a important thing because you want to do something new, and you have no idea if it's going to be a good new thing or a lousy new thing. So Charles Lloyd would say that whenever he gave a concert, he wanted to put out all of his energy. He wanted to do everything, give the audience their money's worth for doing things. And so when I'd go to his concerts, I could see that was what he was doing. He was really putting everything out there. And so whenever you're playing music and trying to do something new, you're taking risks. It's not going to work, and often it doesn't. And there are different ways of resolving that, like Booker Little said, if you play a supposedly wrong note, you just play more, because notes are not, isolated. And so ways to cover your supposed mistakes. But if you make a mistake, it's not the end of the world, right? We all make mistakes all the time. And it's because we believe something. So we believe we're going to play something great. And usually our beliefs aren't true. So we don't. And so it happens. But at least we tried. So risk is important there.
Yeah, the word lie is in the middle of the word believe. But this is Viola Spolin. If the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. Do you think those, on risk, it's funny, most people go, yeah, risk is an important factor. Napoleon Murphy Brock, who sang with Zappa on some of his best albums, said, I leave risk in the dressing room. It's like, well, do you want to come out on stage and have the audience feel that you're confident and you know what you're doing? Or is it to this extent where Viola is saying, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it? So any thoughts on the role of struggle? Yeah,
that's a good one. So lots of people don't want artists to take risks. They want to hear the same thing over and over, exactly like it was on the record or whatever.
Yeah.
There are those people who don't want that, but you can go to, say, a Zappa show with his band, with Ruth and these people, and they were so highly practiced musicians that they had the technique to achieve these things that makes you go, wow, that's amazing. And so I really appreciate technique. I think it's great that people have managed to do these, learn how to do these great things. It's like doing magic, that you can't believe they can make this happen. And so there's that, which does not necessarily involve risk, although it does, because they might not be as practiced as they'd like and make mistakes. But basically you hear this stuff that's just great because it's such wonderful music making. But then there's the other thing that And it's probably a minority of music that you hear where you improvise or you do something that's risky, and it's neat when it works. So yeah, I think that, probably it doesn't apply to most music, but it does apply to a lot of important music.
Well, that's like the freedom that you're hoping for in improvising. Because Napoleon, when I asked him all these questions, he was, really studied and had to play all this complicated Zappa music. But then he would be thrown in a situation where Frank wanted to just improvise with him and make up stuff on the spot. And that's where Napoleon came up with the words "nothing is what I want," and then Frank said a true Zen saying. And so this idea of the freedom, when I worked for George Carlin, we got a flyer in the mail. It says, I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity. So just the freedom to have freedom, it's funny because the question is, Utah Phillips said, anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Yeah, that really gets to an important point, because there's freedom. And I mean, in Zappa's case, he didn't give his musicians a lot of autonomy.
Yeah.
He'd solo and he'd improvise, but most of his musicians didn't get to improvise that much. And yeah, somebody like Don Preston, he had to improvise. And so he definitely didn't give people as much autonomy as one might want.
Yeah.
And so that is important, that you think that a creative person should have autonomy to create the way that they want and make their own mistakes, right?
Yeah, well, he did give Don that great solo and the Moog synthesizer on Grand Wazoo, where the guy who invented the Moog goes, "That's the best use of my invention ever." But here's the
Don playing on the iPhone.
Say it again.
Have you heard Don play the iPhone?
I have not. Is it on YouTube?
It's incredible. I don't know. I heard him live doing this, and it was unbelievable. And of course, at the end of his long solo, the iPhone went up in flames, seemingly. So, magician.
So how long ago was that? Recent or a long time ago?
I guess it's been, 20 some years.
Oh, because Don is soloing and he's like 95. And I got lucky. I got to ask him all these same questions that I'm asking you. And we're both from Flint, Michigan. So here's the bottom line on that, Alan. The word freedom etymologically means the same thing as anarchy, as what Utah Phillips said anarchy is. Freedom is giving oneself one's own laws. So I'm going to set it up. T.S. Eliot said, freedom is only truly freedom when it appears against the background of an artificial limitation. McLuhan said, how are you to argue with people who insist on sticking their heads in the invisible teeth of technology, calling the whole thing freedom? What does freedom mean to you now?
Yeah, well, so first, anarchy is, the usage tends to be for government. But of course, you can talk about musical anarchy and all kinds of other things. So yeah, it can be applied to something like freedom, but freedom can mean all kinds of things. So, you have to have freedom to play conventionally, or, to play, completely composed music, free to do things. So
Yeah.
Freedom, big deal. And I really like the word autonomy, which, freedom to be yourself. Not that people tell you what to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the important part of freedom, I think.
Well, it perfectly leads into, Alan. Ben Ratliff wrote a book on Bill Frisell. He says, I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art. As in, every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So he reduced Miles to two words, fragile and pointed. Like me and you could hear Miles a couple notes and go, oh, that's Miles. John Coltrane, slightly undercooked and urgent. What two words would you apply to Beefheart, and what two words would you apply to Eric Dolphy if you were capturing their artistic personality in two words?
Not enough words. Well, Don was a primitive.
Oh, that's good.
But, you know, he had enormous imagination. So, imagination, but primitive. Whereas Dolphy was, you know, so Dolphy was, you know, trained, highly trained.
Yeah.
And innovative.
Yeah. No, that was good. Innovative and trained. Don is primitive and imaginative. Beautiful.
But there's much more to them. Of course.
Oh yeah, there's much more to it, but definitely. So I spoke with Michael Apted, the filmmaker, 40 years ago. I said, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it flourished in the 80s with MTV to the point where Marty Scorsese said, I cut my films faster because of MTV. So Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. Now, I ask this with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
No, we can learn all kinds of things. You know, the natural world moves slowly, primarily. And so having things go at higher frequencies can be appealing to people because it's something different.
Yeah.
Stimulating. So, but, you know, we have our limits. Our frequency tuning is a curve that is kind of high at low frequencies and can go up a little bit to moderate frequencies, but then it always falls off at high frequencies. We can't handle things that change too quickly. So, you know, we can't hear tones and we can't hear music that goes so fast that you can't distinguish what's going on at all. So it all involves time. And, you know, I don't know what the cultural significance is that, you know, people need fast cutting.
Can humans literally multitask?
Supposedly not. But yeah, I think they can to some extent, certainly.
Yeah.
You know, drummers have, you know, 4-limb independence. So that's kind of multitasking. I think it happens, but you know, who knows if you're trying to achieve something, if you can achieve two things at once.
What's your hunch or guess was the motive of the cave artists, the cave musicians, and the cave dancers? What was their motive?
Probably expression, you know, need to express themselves, and, you know, communication. So I don't know how much cave painting we know about that we can tell, you know, how it evolved, what they might have been doing it for. So some people probably know the answer to that. I don't.
No, I'm going for your hunch. Alan, what's more important, conviction or compromise?
I'd have to think conviction is important. Compromise, you know, something that's necessary. So I don't know. Can you explain how they're...
Well, that's good. Compromise is necessary. I like that. That's a good enough breakdown. Okay, you've accomplished a lot. How do you rate these three elements in your accomplishments? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Yeah, I don't think that accomplishment is that important. You know, it's something that you learn from other cultures that don't see, you know, don't really have the concept of accomplishment.
Yeah.
But So what are the three?
Luck, skill, and ambition.
Luck is really important. Yes, development of skills is what I would say. Learning things.
Yeah.
And ambition is important, I think, because there are lots of people who don't have ambition. I think it's kind of unfortunate that it might not be for them, but people need to be motivated to do anything. Motivation is what I would say was important there. But I don't know. People just, accomplish things all the time. Every day they get up, and that's an accomplishment.
That is indeed.
Everything we do is an accomplishment, as far as I'm concerned.
Lewis Carroll says, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, I guess so, because there are all these impossible figures, visual things that can't exist in reality, but we see them, and a lot of them depend on the separation between local and global processing. So locally they make sense, but globally they don't. And It's a really important question of how we go from the local to the global. We understand a lot about local processing in the brain, but we don't really know how it gets to be globalized. And so that's something that I've speculated a lot about.
That is heavy. I love that idea. Thank you. So tell me one major element of your Alan creativity, science, music research, all of who Alan is. One major element that's stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
The basic things that I did when I was younger, that's kind of stayed the same. And I think the one thing that I've learned that's important about creativity, and I guess it was a realization that grew out of Douglas Hofstadter, is that structure, rules are really a key to being creative. You need to kind of have rules that you can break and do things that are creative. And, you have to, you do that naturally, I guess, but it was nice to realize that and to know that the structure is really important.
It's good. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Well, I don't know if I turned it into strength, but I'm not. The weakness is my difficulty with being rigorous, and so I never really learned to be rigorous in all ways. I mean, there's some ways that I guess I am quite rigorous about, but it's kind of like, all these people that have, psychological issues that people think are a bad thing, and they think that it's actually, useful to them. So be more creative if you're, autistic or something. So it's more complicated than just calling it a weakness or a strength. Probably all weaknesses can be turned into strengths, or all strengths can be turned into weaknesses. And it's just, words that seem to be opposites, but they definitely interact.
That is why identify it, just process it. That was really good. No one's ever taken that route. I appreciate that. So Fill in the blank, Alan. Anger can be a productive emotion when.
I guess it can be when somebody realizes that you feel a certain way. You've expressed yourself, and it can lead to them behaving differently or something. When somebody's angry, you can try to see why they're angry and learn something about them. But it's really a very strong emotion that can lead to expression, and so a lot of times expressions of anger people find worthwhile. They appreciate those expressions. A lot of times anger is misinterpreted. So, people said that Coltrane and other people like that are angry. That's why they played the way they did, which was not true at all. So it's misread. Emotions are easily misread. And so people think somebody's angry because, that's just the way they are. But usually it's because something made them angry.
Yeah. That Johnny Lydon album, PIL, is anger is an energy. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Not much.
Yeah.
Women have a smaller variance. The variation is a little smaller in population of women than men. And so that shows up in, so IQ, for instance, people would argue that there's a difference in IQ, but the only difference really is that the tails of the distributions of IQ are larger in men than women because it's a bigger variance, but it really doesn't amount to anything. And so on the population level, you might be able to distinguish some slight differences, but if you pick a woman and a man, you're not going to find any differences, statistically.
Wow. What caused matriarchy?
I guess it was probably women insisting on running things. I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably
There's a
women
line.
did it.
Say it again.
Probably women were responsible for creating matriarchal cultures.
Yeah. There's a line that goes, you create what you resist. Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your brain is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So how would you respond to this line? You create what you resist. Not you, Alan, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that?
Well, resistance is one thing that we do, and it can certainly lead to creation of ways to, try to satisfy what you're resisting about, that that you're getting somewhere better than what you don't like. So if you hate something, then you try to do better than that, and so again, you're having words that describe something that is very broad and interactive with the other thing that you're talking about, and so they have all kinds of relationships to each other, I suspect.
Yeah. That's the McLuhan's main thing, is understanding relationships. So that's cool. How do you find peace of mind?
Well, I generally have peace of mind. I just have that, high parasympathetic tone. So again, what that means is that it's the opposite of the sympathetic tone, which is fight or flight. And parasympathetic tone is when you're at peace. You don't have to worry about somebody eating you or danger. And so it's this thing that almost everybody probably doesn't realize, that the way they are in that kind of peaceful or frenetic spectrum has to do with their autonomous nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. Autonomic, not autonomous. So yeah, I don't know, but when I got my diagnoses, I didn't get all upset about it. I'm just curious about it. There are times when I'm not at peace, certainly when I'm anxious, but generally I don't have to do much to be at peace. If I'm up in the mountains or in the Grand Canyon, or listen to music, and lots of things help to put me at peace, but generally I'm pretty close to that already.
That's pretty cool. So here's 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head in just a couple words. 1, who started it all?
I don't know. I don't think anyone started it all. Lots of people start certain things, but nobody started it all.
Not anyone, but I love you laugh, because that's what this is about. The second one,
nobody for president, by the way.
Nobody for president?
Yeah.
That's good.
Remember that 1980, I think it was.
Yeah. Second Alan Watts is, are we going to make it?
No.
3, where do we put it?
It's geez, what's the comedian's name? The deadpan comedian had lots of things like that. If you had everything, where would you put it?
Stephen Wright.
Stephen Wright, thank you.
Yeah.
Where
would we put it? That's a good comeback. Okay, the fourth one is, who's cleaning it up?
I guess when the sun expands billions of years from now and takes over, burns up the earth and everything, that'll clean it up. So the sun. And 5, is it serious?
I
guess it can be, but generally not.
Yeah. That's Zappa said, I'm very serious about being not serious.
Yeah, he's serious about lots of things, and then he was humor about lots of things.
Well, can satire be destructive? I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, and he said, that's the job of satire. And Swift compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. And Frank nailed it. He said, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. What's the function of satire?
It expresses kind of strong feelings of, usually distaste, by turning it around. And, some people understand that what's being said has to be turned around, and that's an interesting little mental exercise to do. So it gives people pleasure.
It's good, Alan. So if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I don't know. I'd say, keep going, persist.
Persist is a good word. Which way?
About, right?
Say it again.
That's what it's all about, is showing up.
Yeah. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Over. But it's not the most important thing.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Oh, I don't know. Another human. Something like that.
Another human. And Alan, they want to scent the glue in the binding of your autobiography. What smell?
I kind of like the smell of olive trees.
Olive trees. How cool is that? If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Maybe a statue made out of laterite, which is what's a lot of roads in wet places, or, like, washes everything but the iron out, so it's a very red thing. And somewhere in Central African Republic, like Kumbala, maybe.
Cool. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
I don't know if I never wanted it. I mean, if it was good, and I'd think that I'd want it. I'm trying to think of something that's good that I wouldn't want. I mean, I don't know. I guess I have to think about that. I'm sure there are things, actually, so I just can't think of them right now.
The three answers I get the most are fame, money, and heroin.
Right. So I don't consider either any of those three good. So
Right. That's, I mean, some people do. So if you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
probably think I'm dreaming, having a bad dream or something.
A bad dream.
Wouldn't believe it was really happening. I don't know. I guess I'd try to get out of there. Fight or flight.
Fight or flight. Few more and we're out of here. Thanks for your time and energy, Alan. So you've been a teacher, and McLuhan said there's basically he asked the question, is there any difference between education and entertainment? It's like setting up a distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other one pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So I've been asking this question for a while, and everybody goes, yeah, I agree, but one guy goes, no, whatever displeases teaches more effectively. So just your thoughts on the difference between education and entertainment and this line, whatever pleases teaches more effectively.
Education can be authoritarian. And that's what, Zappa and Beefheart and lots of other people rebelled against.
Yeah.
But, when you're teaching, you do hit that authoritarian note often, probably. But, you try to get the students to teach themselves. So you're teaching them to teach themselves and, to be interested in questions that you're interested in, that you think they can be interested in. So teaching versus what was this?
Entertainment.
Entertainment. So you entertain. That's certainly a big part of it. But it's not all entertaining for the students, and so you have a bigger job than just entertaining them. It's a tough job, and I think of the good teachers, and it's largely keeping students interested in learning. I think that's the biggest part of the job. So entertainment can keep you interested, but just having, when they feel like they're learning things, and they were interested in them, then they keep being interested in it until it gets too hairy and beyond what they can learn, and they're not so interested in that.
Right. Well, what's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Huh. I guess, the woke culture is a bit of a shift. I'm not sure how different it is than what was happening, but that kind of inspires me that people were making changes to help other people. So, but there are probably lots of things. Just been thinking a lot about disabilities and how that's changed to, I think, a pretty decent extent, and it's promising.
Yes. So this is about a project we're working on archiving. The word comes from the 14th century, keep safe, free from harm, but 200 years later, it's what we know it as, records preserved as evidence. And Charles Baudelaire said, if you try to make a statement long, deep, and rich, it will age very fast. If you try to own the day you're talking, it will last forever. Or as David Lee Roth quipped, here today, gone later today. But, studying the Eastern philosophers in Ram Dass, isn't the point of life to be here now, live in the moment? In fact, Wyndham Lewis said, artists live in the present and write a detailed history of the future. So even the Egyptians put stuff in their coffin. It's basically two questions, Alan. Is this need or want to archive more innate or more invented? And do you have plans for your own archive?
So I think there's some good delusions in there that, present doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, past doesn't exist. There are things that we make up to help us process things. So my recall is gone, so it's hard for me to remember what you were asking. But
well, this need, like you have an archive, I'm sure, some notes for your prep on your book, for your research that you've done as a scientist. Is there a college or an archive that's going to store them for you? Do your loved ones know what to do with your boxes of stuff, or your thoughts on your own archive?
Yeah, so I have had extensive Dolphy archives, and I realized that I shouldn't just hold on to them, so I passed them along to a friend. I think I told you about this guy, great musician, Dolphy scholar, all kinds of good things about him. So, he has that archive now, and I hope we'll preserve it and pass it along or whatever. Not much I can do about these things. For my science stuff, I've published, and I have this book that's online, and I hope that I can keep it online, but I don't know. It doesn't matter to me, and so if it doesn't matter to other people, then I'm not worried about it.
Right, so, but it's like the futurist, or it's an art movement in Italy that said burn all the museums and libraries. Like, I go to a library every day. I love them, but I do love the idea they thought that up. And we know, well, studying history is important, but is this need to archive more innate or more invented? Is it in us innately, or did we invent this archiving?
No, you got to think of time as circular. and things repeat, things, similar things happen again and again. And, we eat breakfast every morning, maybe. And so our ideas, appear and reappear, and we talk about them a lot, and they, come back. They keep showing up, and then other people have similar ideas, and, people make music, and they keep playing similar things their whole lives, and they change it to various extents. So that's the way to think about it, that they're processes that are not fixed at a point in time. Points in time don't exist. There's no such thing as the present.
Yeah.
And there's things that reoccur, and they change, but they're recognizable in ways. So you talk a lot about etymology and wondering about how words arose and what they mean, and the meaning changes, and that's okay. So I've gotten to like this guy online, a guy named Dan McClellan, who talks about the Bible and religion, and he's an expert on ancient Western religions, and particularly Christianity. And so he talks about how these things in the Bible happened, came about, what their etymology is, but the etymology is not very important. It's really how they've been transliterated and translated and changed. And that's kind of key information, that we should think about things as being circular, being cyclical.
I like that a lot. Thanks, Alan. And what's a question that remains unresolved for you?
So many. So I studied a type of neuron called lagged cells, and we recorded a lot of them in the visual system, but I suspect that they exist in all of the different processing streams, and so I really wanted to study that, and I never really got a chance. So that's a question I'd like to know about, if there are lagged cells in auditory and somatosensory systems and motor systems and things like that. So anyway, that's a big scientific question for me.
Well, that's a good one. That's good.
Well,
How has
people don't know about lagged cells, and so it doesn't.
Well, it might cause them to go seek it out. Yeah. Seek out more information. I mean, that's what I'm always learning, and I appreciate you teaching me here. So, a couple more. We're done. Alan, how has being a scientist shaped your behavior, and how has being a music scholar shaped your behavior?
So I am a scientist, but I've been very aware of recently that I tend to put things in scientific terms or whatever. I think that way. So I go to church every Sunday pretty much, because my wife's the priest, and it's always interesting for me to go to church, and I have no interest in the religious thing, except that it's an interesting behavior that we have. And so I think of the religious stuff scientifically, which is what this guy, Dan McClellan, does. So he talks all about religion, but he, has the phrase data, not dogma. And, so he tries to acquire data and interpret things based on data. So, that scientific point of view is important. And for music, so it's the question, how does music affect the way I think about things?
Shaped your behavior.
Yeah, shaped my behavior. So, so my wife would say it makes me snobbish, but I care about music, so I don't listen to the music that is played on the radio or something, that popular music. I care about how the music's made, and I listen to what's happening in the music, fairly closely. So I have those behaviors about music that are somewhat different than some people.
Yeah. So Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for hours with me, Alan. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
I don't think it has to be about anything. People
Yeah.
say, what's life about, or what's the universe about? It just happens. And so I think the important things in life are to enjoy things and help people. Learning is important to me. So, we're very social animals, and so family and friends are extremely important.
It's good.
So, having, a wife who I love and respect and, get so much from is
Beautiful.
One of the great things about life.
Beautiful. What gives you the most optimism?
So, climate change makes me very pessimistic. I think, life on Earth is probably going to go away in 100 years. And I tend to be optimistic about things. I keep hoping the Pittsburgh Pirates will win. So young people make me optimistic. They're doing some great things. But there's all this, bad stuff down the line, which is unfortunate.
Well, it's funny, Alan, because most people say youth. What gives you the most optimism? Youth, younger people. And the first question I asked in part one was, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah.
And the last question I asked is, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he said, other people. So it's sure been, yeah.
Joke?
Yeah. Everything he said was a joke, but that's Steve Allen. Behind every joke, there's a grievance. There's probably a truth behind, but it's sure been fun spending this time with another person, especially because it was you. I really appreciate this, Alan. And you really taught me a lot. And even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you so much.
I don't like talking usually, but it's really fun to talk with somebody about things that you're interested in. I had that experience last night with my roommate here. So yeah, talking can be good. I hope I can keep talking for a long time, but who knows? And
saying family and friend is what it's really all about, and that's important to me too. So thanks again, Alan. I really appreciate it.
I just want to make sure I mentioned that doesn't exclude strangers.
Yeah, right. No, I love that. Running up into new people and meeting new friends is always good, and even if you don't know them.
Great. Well, thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Alan.
Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.
I got time to look at your other stuff.
Oh, good. Well, we'll be in touch. Thanks again.
Take care.